and good morning. This is going to be a video on how I do my plumbing pole plans for residential plans. There are several things that are important to note. The reason I do one of these also is because a lot of times there are mistakes when you have framers who are trying to read the floor plan and you've got other people working on things. Sometimes the dimension might get modified manually, and if they change that dimension by just clicking and dragging it, the dimension stays the same. So what has happened before I've seen is that sometimes a pipe that was supposed to be in this wall ended up outside of the wall, and that is pretty a costly fix, anywhere from 2 to 3 grand, depending on how much they have to saw cut out of the foundation. So I do this as a separate plan. That way there's no mistakes. Typically that I've had anyway, when I do one of these plans, everything is always good to go. So these are some general notes that I typically have. A lot of properties here in Texas are out on several acres, so they typically will do gas stub up for propane, unless they choose to do all electric, but typically they don't. I've got my hose bed, which are my outside faucets. Some people choose to do a tankless water heater, while others will just do a basic tank heater, anywhere from 50 to 75 gallon tank. They have not decided yet what they're going to do on this property, so I'm just going to be doing everything else. If they wanted to do, have an actual water tank in there, they would probably have to take some of this pantry space or some of this countertop space and put in a water heater there. But a lot of people are going to the tankless. I also have, typically, this is where I call out my dimensions for my island, because I do have electrical outlets in here, so I'll draw some dimensions. If they have a sink, they would also be separate dimensions for that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and get started. Typically what I do is I have a small drain here for, typically this is going to be for your sinks. A lot of plumbers don't necessarily like it right behind the sink. They like it off to the side a little bit. It gives them a little bit of space. My toilets, I always have this already in the plan. I might have snaps on so that this way. I'll have that off. There we go. So typically, in order to get your toilet as far off of the wall, there's a standard dimension. Typically, it's like 1 foot one or 1 foot 1.5. I used to do it at 12 uh, inches roughly, but after talking to another plumber, he suggested adding an additional inch, just in case there's any discrepancies. That way, you have plenty of clearance for the tank lid that goes on back, and it's not just literally touching the dill. But so I always go from center of my hole to the outside face. That way they know they can come out here and pull and get that dimension. I then give them another dimension from there to here at 18.3. Again, I always take all of my layers in here and I change them from the XREF. Sorry, that's off screen. Let me pull this over. Anything, and I change it to color 11, which is a lightweight color on mine, so that all the layers from that show up the same color. Minus occasionally the windows, for some reason there's a built-in couple of layers that you have to go through to find those that honestly don't give me much trouble. So I also have a drain here for the shower. This is going to be important. This will be in slab. Out. And it's also a good check too, because typically if you've got it drawn correctly, with your dimensions, you should always typically end up with either an even, a half, or a 3/4. The reason I have 3/4 on this one is because of the overall width of the shower and the bench. But you can see like my toilet, 18.3, 13.7, so it's a good solid dimension. Hadn't really centered this in here, so I'm gonna go ahead and draw a line over here so that I can get this centered in the wall. Now I'm going to dimension this up. And I usually come back in and put my names in separately and change them so that I can move them around so they don't get in the way of the dimension lines. 12 foot 3 1/4. This is a 2x6 wall, so it's okay if I mess with this a little bit. I'm going to pull it back 1/4 of an inch, so to make it an easy 12 foot 3. Out to the edge here. Now this, it doesn't matter where it's at, but I want to give them the easiest dimensions to pull to. So I'm going to come back 2 3/4 of an inch, so they got an easy 14. And typically I like to bring my grip points just so there's not a ton of red everywhere. Do that same for here. A lot of times I'll come back and do it after the fact, but since I'm working on it and doing this, I'll go ahead and click these. It just looks cleaner and you don't have this long dark line. So every whole pipe vent stack should have 2 dimensions. So that's one way you can kind of check yourself. I have 2 dimensions here, I have 2 dimensions here, and I have 2 dimensions here. So now I know that I'm finished with this bathroom. I can then copy this over to my other bathroom, place that. Got another shower on the other side here. Got my drain that will be here. Also got some valves and shower heads. Excuse me. These, they bring the water lines from up above down the walls. I don't really recommend pulling up lines from your slab anymore. I know they used to do that a lot back in the day. I have a washing machine, so there's going to be a vent stack and drain off to the side. I also have my sink and a dishwasher, so I'm going to pull that one off to the side over here. Just kind of randomly place it. Kind of look around the rest of the house to make sure I don't have any other drains that are going to be anywhere. I don't see any. One thing I do, I typically make sure I call out a refrigerator water line. Even if they don't have an ice maker or a machine, it's always good to just have that in there for future. So if somebody else buys your house, they can make sure that they've got water to the line. So also have my text for that. Bring this down. There we go. Let's see. I would recommend for this house putting a gas stub up here that's close to the cooktop. That way they can run it here. Also, they could run it in the wall and up and come over if they were going to put a gas water heater over here. I'm just going to leave it like that. I also have my hose bib. Copy the whole thing. I usually like to try to have one not too far off the back door. They have several exits on this house, but I don't want to go crazy with putting hose bibs that do cost per line. So let's get this one over here. And I will be asking for the couple that is building this to just kind of look at the locations that I've randomly selected and make sure that they're good with those locations, or if they would prefer to have them moved. This one on the side so it's not ugly and sticking out front. I could also put it over here possibly, but all right. So I don't have any water to the island, but I do, since this is a pool sheet, it's a little confusing. I've got these light dashes here. These are for the island low wall. These are for the ceiling up above. I could probably freeze those. Yeah, that froze too much, so I'll leave those on. I will copy this. Probably put it on one side. Go ahead and throw on dimension. So again, I want that to be an easy number, so I'm just going to stretch it back 5/8. That'll give me 23. The outside, the 3/16. I have a noisy husky, likes to make noises while I'm doing videos. There we go. So now I have the 2 dimensions for this, and so I always use my arrows to signify which lines those are. Typically the main reason I do this is because a lot of times I'll have another drain with dimensions to it if there is a sink in the counter. So let's go ahead and do this. Now this happens to be a 2x6 wall here. A lot of times it's not. So it's okay to, let's go this way. That way I have a solid. Typically I'll try to pull this dimension out, use a little arc that point to it so that it's easy to find. This is roughly the middle of the house, so I've got it off to the side. I'm going to go to this outside corner here. Again, I can stretch this so that it's an easy, I'm going to go 15/16 back this way. Not sure what I did there. 15/16. No, this way. The wrong way with that. 24 foot and 5 inches, and this edge is basically the inside of the form. So I always add a note if they're pulling from the outside of the forms, because the plumber is going to do his rough in before the slab is poured, obviously. So I always say if you're going to pull from the outside of the form, add 1.5 inches, because they typically use 2x4s for their forms. I've not had anybody use anything thinner, so. All right, so anyway, I've got my 2 dimensions there, so that is taken care of. This is where I'm back at just a 2x4 wall, so it's much harder to get that in there. So you want to try to make sure that you have it just in the right spot. Either move it from the quadrant or the center. And so this is where you're going to get that 3 3/4 of an inch dimension. Pull this over here and then again do my arc. Dog drives me crazy sometimes. All right. This corner. Again, 15/16, so I can just stretch this back this way. 15/16. Oops. 7/8. Oh my gosh. I'm not thinking today. Got me distracted over there. There we go. 9/10. I could pull it 2 inches further to make it an even 10 feet. That way it's a little further over where the drain comes in. They're going to come off of this and have a drain anyway that it's going to pop up, so this makes it easier for them to connect to. Pardon me for a second. Okay, I'm back. We actually technically had 3 huskies, and there was a bone near 2 of them, and they were going nuts over who was going to try and get it. So I stopped and made sure it went outside with the bone. So, all right. So, yeah. So that's the reason why I put all of my dimensions the outside, and I got myself in trouble there. I wasn't paying attention. That dimension was not quite on the actual edge, so I'm not sure how that happened, but so now I need to go back and readjust this. Again, I never recommend, a lot of times people are like, oh, I'll just change the dimension. You can come in here under properties, scroll down, and right here you can do text override. I recommend never doing that, because then if this moves or they've taken something out and you forget that you overrode that, and you make it a specific dimension, anywhere you stretch it, it doesn't matter. That dimension is going to stay the same, and they're not going to notice that it might be off. They're just going to notice that that's what the dimension is, and then they are going to go with that dimension. So I don't do that. Okay, so I got my 2 dimensions for this one. I only have, 2 dimensions for that, 2 dimensions for this. So now I can move over to my other bathroom. Again, from the center line there, this is closer to there. So I'm going to go ahead and run my dimension to here. And so again, I like seeing even dimensions or halves. Again, sometimes quarter, depending on how close you are to the wall. So this one has 2 dimensions. Also try to click on the dimension, pull it out of the way if it's running through another dimension line, just for clarity's sake. Got my toilet over here. Go ahead and do him. Again, you can mess around with this. This is a little bit further from here to here than it is from here to here, so I choose to always go the shortest dimension as best as often as possible. All right. There we go. So now I have 2 dimensions for that. Got this one in the wall. Basically, when it's in the 2x4, it's always going to typically be like a 3/4 inch dimension. So the way to do it is just to simply draw a line. I can move this to the center rather than doing a dimension and then trying to finagle it. Again, I'll pull it out, do my arc line. Oops. He likes to pick points. Turn off my OSNAP. There we go. And this is still going to be closer to this corner. Now this one I can adjust up and down easily. So again, I want to do it in a way that makes it as easy as possible. So I'm just going to stretch it a 1/2 inch down so that I'm now at even 18. So again, I've got 2 dimensions, 2 dimensions, 2 dimensions. And this is a small plan. I'll do a larger plan here in a little bit. But this is everything you basically need to know. One thing I do like to come in, just in case the plumber isn't paying attention, I've got 2 separate shower heads in here with 2 separate valves for that. So that's always important. I will typically come in and add a note that says valve. See, I think I have that over here. Shower head and valve as selected by owner. That way the owner knows. And that was obviously from a much larger. That was a drawing that was done at 3/16 scale, which is why the text was so large. So you always want to make sure that you come back and double check. See if I can. Oh, that's really big. I can double check it with my dim scale is correct here. That's why I use the LE for leader command. And then typically it's a 16th scale size, so I like it to be an 1/8". So I'll go back in and just manually change it to an 1/8". You can see it got larger, but it's now at least at the right size. That head was the size for a 3/16 scale. All right, and copy this leader. So I've got my separate valves. Call out. Here. These out of the way. I'll have them review this plan and then ask them, what it is they would like to do for the shower or the tankless water heater. If they are actually going to use propane, some people are afraid of propane, don't want it, so they just choose to go all electric. I'm actually doing a no-no right here. I don't typically ever try to cross my leader lines over to my dimension lines. Just can be confusing. I'm going to stretch this down here and just pull it down. Have it like so. All right, and I've got my plumbing pole plan. The scale is 1/4 inch equals a foot, and that should take care of this plan. Thank you for watching.